They say once you sit at their table, you never walk away alive. I guess I was the exception. Or maybe the curse. My name doesn't matter. In this world, names are liabilities. What matters is how I got in, and why I chose to burn everything once I did. It started 3 years ago, in the heart of Manhattan, the kind of city that chews men up, swallows their pride and spits them out in Italian suits. I wasn't born into power. I wasn't even born into crime. I built myself out of the cracks, the overlooked, the underestimated, the invisible. That's what made me dangerous. The Russo family ran everything east of the Hudson, money laundering through construction, tech companies, crypto, even charity foundations. They weren't gangsters anymore. They were businessmen who wore blood as cologne. And me? I was just a quiet name in their books, a consultant. At least that's what they thought. I got in through Marco Russo, the Don's nephew. He liked me because I didn't talk much. I made numbers move without leaving fingerprints. He once said, "You got ice in your veins, kid." He didn't know that ice came from watching my brother die because of men like him. I never planned to join them. I planned to end them. But the funny thing about power is, it's addictive. You taste it once and you start believing you can control it. Before I knew it, I was wearing the same suits, shaking the same hands, smiling at the same politicians who toasted with devils in private. And somewhere along the way, I started forgetting why I was even there. The first time I saw Don Salvatore Russo, I understood why everyone feared him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violent. He was quiet. The kind of man who could ruin your entire life with a single phone call and still send you flowers for your funeral. He looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "Every man has a price. I hope you know yours." I smiled. "Mine's still being negotiated." He laughed. And that laugh opened the gates of hell for me. From that day on, I was in deeper than I ever imagined. They trusted me with everything. The offshore accounts, the encrypted ledgers, the dirty crypto transactions that passed through shell companies in Dubai and Singapore. If the Russo Empire had a heartbeat, I was the one controlling its pulse. I watched how power moved, silent, invisible, coded in favors and threats. The FBI wanted them for years, but never touched them because everyone from judges to senators was in their pocket. They weren't criminals anymore. They were a system, and I was the ghost inside it. Marco treated me like a brother. He introduced me to his world, the dinners, the parties, the women, the sense of belonging. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider. I was one of them. But every smile I gave cost me another piece of my soul. Because behind every champagne glass was blood, innocent people losing homes, men disappearing, businesses collapsing overnight. And I was the one writing the code that made it all invisible. I used to stare at myself in the mirror some nights and whisper, "You're not one of them. You're just playing the part." But deep down, I didn't know anymore. It was during one of those nights that she walked in, Elena Russo, the Don's daughter. Sharp mind, colder heart. But her eyes, they were the only honest thing in that house. We met during a charity gala, the kind where everyone pretends to care about orphans while making million-dollar deals behind the stage. She caught me watching her and smiled like she knew my secrets. Later, she said, "You look like a man carrying ghosts." I replied, "You look like someone who can see them." That's how it began, not love. Not lust, something more dangerous, connection. She wasn't blind to her father's world. She just accepted it. "The world's built on blood," she told me once. "The only question is who's bleeding and who's cashing in." Her words haunted me, because I didn't know which side I was on anymore. By the end of that year, I had everything I ever thought I wanted: money, respect, power. But I also had the Don's eyes on me. He started asking questions, little ones at first. "Where did you learn to move money like that? Who trained you? What did you do before you met Marco?" I lied. He knew it, but he didn't say anything. He just smiled. That same slow, calculated smile that made your blood go cold. One night, Marco called me out of nowhere. His voice was shaking. "Someone's feeding the feds. There's a mole." My heart froze, because I was that mole, but it wasn't the FBI I was working for. It was my own operation. I had built a silent backdoor into every Russo account, every offshore server. I was weeks away from crashing their empire from the inside, erasing billions and exposing every dirty transaction tied to them. I told myself it was justice. But when Marco said, "I trust you more than anyone, brother," Something inside me broke. That's when betrayal stops being a plan and becomes a tragedy. Elena grew suspicious too. She'd catch me watching the news, checking financial alerts, or vanishing for hours. One night she confronted me. "Who are you really?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She stepped closer, whispered, "My father likes you. That means you'll either end up rich or dead." Then she kissed me like a warning. And for a moment, I almost gave up everything. The plan, the revenge, the ghost of my brother, just to stay alive in her eyes. But by then, it was too late. The Don announced a private meeting. Just the family heads, and me. Marco told me, "It's about loyalty." Those words felt like a death sentence. That night, I wore the same black suit I started with, the one that still smelled like ambition and regret. When I walked into that room, I knew every lie, every move, every breath had led to this. Don Salvatore poured 2 glasses of wine. He looked at me and said, "You've done good work, but every man must prove where his heart belongs." He slid a phone across the table. On the screen, a live security feed of a warehouse. Inside, Marco, tied to a chair. The Don whispered, "Someone betrayed us. If it isn't you, then kill him." My blood ran cold. My throat dried. That was the moment I realized, to stay alive, I had to kill the only man who ever trusted me, and that's where everything changed. They set the room up like a stage. Velvet curtains, heavy chandelier, the kind of theater where men applaud with knives hidden in their hands. The Don watched me over that table like a man counting birds by their shadow. Marco's eyes searched mine for something that wasn't there anymore. I could see the panic behind his bravado, the boy who still believed in brothers. He trusted me enough to walk into that trap because I'd taught him to trust. When the phone lit the screen, live feed of Marco in the warehouse, my hands didn't shake. I had rehearsed this 1,000 times in my head, the lines I would tell myself, the way I would make the knife look like fate. The Don's voice was velvet and ice when he slid the decision toward me. "Prove you are ours, or prove you are the traitor." "Kill him," he said. "Kill your brother." Everything I'd planned, everything I'd justified as justice, it narrowed to that one moment. Kill him, and I keep my life, my new face, my place among liars. Refuse, and I die as an example. For a second, the boy who buried his brother in a cold queen's grave at 19 rose up inside me, and I thought of the promise I made to blood and memory. But promises don't survive in rooms like those. Only choices do. I stood. I walked to the window. The city looked small, a valley of lives I had been picking apart like threads. I thought of Elena's hand in mine at that charity gala, her kiss like a blade. I thought of Marco's laugh when he called me brother. I thought of the ledger I'd hidden, the back door I'd left in their machines, and the list of names I could spill to the world if I had the nerve. My mouth was dry. I could feel the weight of everything I'd set in motion like a debt in my chest. Then I did the thing they expected. I went to the warehouse. I found Marco bound and bloodless, eyes wide with the betrayal I'd given him. There was no heroics, only a silence that smelled like old wine and fear. He looked at me as if I'd stolen his soul. He said one name only. Why? I wanted to answer with the long speech I'd written 12 times, but words crumble when you press them against a man you love. Instead, my hand moved of its own accord. The blade found its way, and the decision was made for me. I pressed down until the world narrowed to the metallic whisper, and Marco's eyes went soft. When I came back to the Don's table, they applauded like they'd been watching a play. The Don's smile was small, controlled. Elena's face didn't change. Marco's blood was on my hands and on my name. The family welcomed me differently after that night, with nods instead of questions, with doors instead of offers. I had paid the toll. For a while, the world seemed to right itself. They gave me power, a seat at that cold table, more access than ever before. I watched the empire move, and I learned that killing a man doesn't erase what he taught you. Marco's mannerisms crept into my speech. His jokes softened my edges. I felt him like a ghost sitting on my shoulder. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the warehouse light, the way his mouth formed that one single question. But victory didn't feel like victory. The ledger I'd planned to unleash, the names, the accounts, the proof, felt smaller with every day I wore his face. Revenge is a hunger that feeds on itself. The more I fed it, the emptier I became. I began to think that maybe justice had been a lie I told myself to avoid becoming what I now was. A man who obeyed orders to survive. Then the leak happened. Not from me. Not yet. Someone else spilled a portion of the files to the press. A tidy piece of corruption that tied judges to charities, tied senators' names to construction kickbacks. The headlines screamed. The feds sniffed. The family bristled and burned. In the chaos, I thought I'd finally have the perfect opening to drop the rest of the ledger, to watch every man who partied on the backs of others fall like dominoes. Instead, they turned their fury inward. They accused me of being the mole. They said the timing of the leak, right after Marco's death, meant I'd been grooming the narrative. They said I wanted to destroy the family to take its ruins. The Don's eyes were colder than the night I killed Marco. The men who'd raised glasses to my loyalty now whispered about my ambition like it was a disease. It was Elena who crossed the room that night and put her hand on my arm. She said, so softly I could barely hear, "You did what you had to." Her voice was kind, like a priest's consolation. I stared at her and realized then that she was not consoling me. She was condensing me into something useful. I had become precisely what her father needed, the loyal instrument who could be blamed and forgiven in a single breath. They staged a purge. Men were disappeared, others pledged louder oaths. They made me walk among them, accept their apologies, smile for the cameras. The ledger was buried, not by the law, but by silence and threats that smelled worse than jail. The world outside went on. The Don maintained his throne. I began to feel my mind fray at the edges. Sleep was a myth. Faces melted into one another. Sometimes I'd wake up with bruises I didn't remember, a pocket full of untraceable cash, and a phone filled with numbers I couldn't recall dialing. The line between who I'd been and who I was becoming thinned until it broke. That's when the truth arrived, not as a revelation, but as a mirror. One night, in a bar I used to own, a man I thought dead slid into the seat opposite me. Not Marco, not anyone I'd known. This man's eyes were familiar, but his name wasn't. He smiled like a confession and said, "You did well." He handed me a thin file. Inside were photographs, receipts, and a recording. My voice, weeks earlier, giving orders to a unit of men I hadn't remembered commanding. My handwriting on invoices I didn't recall signing. The ledger entries I swore I'd hidden. Had I really? Or had someone been writing my signature for me? I realized then that the Don had not simply tested me. He had taught me to be someone else. Memories can be planted as effectively as planted evidence. In the weeks after Marco's murder, I had been given doses of something, a cocktail of sleep deprivation, favors, and whispered narratives that made me obey without the burden of memory. I had been rebuilt into the family's perfect soldier, capable, ruthless, and utterly convinced of his own motives. The psychological twist was not that I survived. The twist was that survival had cost me the continuity of self. I had been engineered to betray on purpose, to be both the blade and the wound. The man who thought he avenged his brother was now unsure if he'd ever been the author of any choice at all. At first I felt fury, the kind that shakes bones. I wanted to tear the family down for making me a ghost inside my own life. But fury is a luxury. I had learned how to hide, and I was tempted to hide again, only this time deliberately. If they could fabricate memories, I could fabricate actions. If they could script me, I could rewrite my part. So I did what a man with no clear past does best. I became a story I told myself. I leaked nothing. I watched. I learned where they hid the copies of my ledger, where they kept the records that tied them to the politicians. I created my own back door inside their back door, a subtle ghost inside the machine, and waited for the right moment when the family would trust me enough to let their guard fall completely. Then I walked away, not with a bang or a chest full of vengeance, but with a slow, patient erasure. I let my name vanish from their ledgers as neatly as they had vanished men who crossed them. I moved into a life with a new face and a new bargain. People whispered that I'd been executed for betrayal. A few even threw flowers at a makeshift memorial. The city likes its myths tidy, but the last line in this story isn't about headlines or revenge. It's the small, terrible thing I learned when I was alone in a cheap apartment staring at the ceiling. You can survive a storm that drowns you, but you will never be the same river again. Sometimes, in the night, I hear the dawn laugh. Sometimes, I see Elena's smile. Sometimes I hear Marco's question echo. Why? And sometimes, if I'm honest, I answer him without words. I don't know. Here's the final strange mercy. I survived. I walked out of their play as a different man. Not freer, not purer, just quieter and more dangerous in a way they cannot measure. They think they own me because they taught me to hate them. They were partly right. They taught me to become the instrument. But instruments can choose to be silent, and silence is its own kind of power. So, I keep moving. I keep watching. I keep the ledger in my head as a map of what they fear. The family thinks they made me. Perhaps they did. But creation is a trick. You can build a thing and polish it until it reflects your face. But sometimes the thing you built will turn its reflection back on you. If anyone ever asks what happened, why the family cracked, why the Don's empire trembled for a while, and then mended, tell them this. A man betrayed them from within, and when he survived, he lost the right to be the man he thought he was. And that in this city is worse than death.